So Mathew Graves is on his way out. U.S. Attorney Mathew Graves, top prosecutor in January 6 cases, to resign.
Some breaking news out of D.C. U.S. Attorney for D.C. Mathew Graves says he is stepping down next month. Graves' office is in charge of prosecuting adult crimes in the district.
Is this just the normal end-of-term resignation, or you think he's nervous about something?
The time for weaponizing the Department of Justice needs to come to an end. And because you refuse to prosecute real criminals that are violating all the crimes here in Washington, D.C., and you want to talk about D.C. residents, they are victims of your abuse of power.
We're going to go into the details, but let me know what you guys think. You think there's some accountability or some charges waiting for the guy for the way he weaponized the DOJ? Mathew Graves is not stepping aside with dignity. He's running from the justice that he knows awaits him.
Mr. Graves, your decision to not prosecute 67% of the crimes in D.C. is absolutely criminal itself. People who were charged with murder have been arrested on average 11 times before. Because you refuse to keep them in jail, you have already abused your position by maliciously prosecuting at least 1,000 people from January 6th.
A Texas man has been convicted in the first criminal trial stemming from the January 6th attack. A jury found Guy Reffitt guilty on all charges related to the riot. He could now spend up to 60 years in prison.
4 members of the far-right extremist group, the Proud Boys, convicted of seditious conspiracy, including the group's former leader, Enrique Tarrio, and 3 others, all found guilty of seditious conspiracy for plotting the attack.
Except they didn't plot any attack, and there was no conspiracy. The New York Times, 4 Proud Boys convicted of sedition in key January 6 case. The rulings also permitted jurors to convict on conspiracy even if they found there was no plan to disrupt the certification of the election. None set forth an explicit plan to storm the building or to forcibly disrupt the election certification taking place inside. There were no explicit orders to attack the Capitol that day.
These arrests are definitely the talk of the town. News West 9 Sammy still caught up with some of Jenny Cudd's neighbors to find out how they feel about her arrest. She joins us live from Cudd's Flower Shop in Midland. Sammy, neighbors told you they're not surprised.
Yeah, Crystal, Jenny is very well known in the community, and that's thanks to her Midland mayoral run back in 2019. She's also very known for her political views, including her stance on masks and wearing them in businesses.
Breaking news out of Washington, a Columbus man has been convicted for his role in the January 6th attack at the U.S. Capitol.
Except there was no attack.
The longest sentence imposed on any January 6th defendant so far. Oath Keepers founder Stuart Rhodes given 18 years in prison. Rhodes was not physically present at the Capitol during the January 6th attack.
But you recently announced that you're going to arrest at least 1,000 more. A man named Mathew Perna, who had no criminal record, peacefully entered the Capitol through an open door on January 6th. He stayed inside roughly 20 minutes. He didn't assault anyone, not a police officer, anyone. He didn't damage any property.
Mathew Graves, the DOJ's partisan enforcer, flees accountability. Mathew Graves, the now resigned U.S. Attorney for the District of Columbia, leaves behind a legacy of corruption and partisanship and a weaponization of the Department of Justice. His tenure, marked by the targeting of President Trump, his allies, and everyday conservatives, has drawn widespread condemnation. Graves' resignation comes as the incoming Trump administration, led by Attorney General Pam Bondi, prepares to hold rogue officials accountable for their abuses of power. Graves is not stepping aside with dignity. He's running from the justice he knows awaits him.
But right before his sentencing, you, Mr. Graves, asked the judge for more time to object to the pre-sentence report, by the way, while you weren't prosecuting many of the crimes in D.C. This was so that you could ask for at least a few more years in prison for the guy that walked around in the Capitol for 20 minutes, not assaulting anyone. Well, 2 weeks later, Mathew Perna hung himself in his garage. Mr. Graves,
Mathew Graves epitomized the Biden administration's use of the DOJ as a political weapon, turning federal prosecutions into acts of partisan warfare. His role went far beyond enforcing the law. He actively sought to crush dissent, intimidate Trump supporters, and protect the Biden family from scrutiny.
The Biden administration continues to egregiously weaponize the federal government. This abuse of power is rotting out numerous federal agencies. The unequal application of justice by Joe Biden's DOJ must be stopped. There cannot be one set of rules if your last name is Biden or Clinton, and another set of rules for everyone else.
Targeting Trump and his allies. Graves' obsession with punishing Trump and his closest allies revealed the DOJ's partisan agenda. Steve Bannon. Graves led the prosecution of Bannon for contempt of Congress, ignoring executive privilege and turning a procedural dispute into a high-profile political spectacle. Not to mention the fact that they basically worked with the media to try to use that to establish what we now know is the Russian hoax.
Steve Bannon also testified behind closed doors today in front of the House Intelligence Committee. Committee members voiced frustration after Bannon invoked executive privilege on behalf of President Trump.
There were 25 questions that the White House authorized him to answer. He answered each of those. He would not go beyond those questions in any of his answers, and that's frustrating.
And Steve Bannon has been found guilty on both counts of contempt of Congress. This is a very big decision because this is something that happens very rarely in this country. David Spunt's been following the trial, and he's got the latest on the verdict. David?
And count one, willful failure to appear for testimony. This was before the January 6th committee last year. Steve Bannon found guilty. Count two, willful failure to provide records to said panel. Steve Bannon found guilty.
Peter Navarro, Trump's trade advisor, faced similar treatment as Graves pursued contempt charges designed to criminalize dissent from a partisan January 6th committee.
Here's where the homework is, because executive privilege goes back to George Washington and his remarks to the Congress regarding the Jay Treaty. As he said, I cannot command you as members of Congress to come to me. You cannot command me to come to you. And the reason is the constitutional separation of powers. And the Supreme Court has been very adamant about the sanctity of executive privilege. That privilege has extended to what's called alter egos of the president, which is what I am as one of his highest advisors. And the principle here related to effective presidential decision making, and if a president does not have the ability between and among his advisors to get confidential information in the sanctity of the Oval Office, he will make poor decisions which will harm the republic.
The judiciary's involvement in addressing executive privilege and its use in resisting disclosure in the face of either judicial or legislative subpoenas did not begin in earnest until the 1970s and the administration of Richard Nixon. Prior to the Nixon era, executive privilege's contours were defined, if at all, by historical practice and the actions and interpretations of Congress and the president. With little further explication coming from the Supreme Court since, the Nixon era remains the defining era of judicial consideration of the privilege. The only appellate-level decision to reach the merits of an executive privilege dispute between Congress and a sitting president occurred nearly 50 years ago. In light of this near-judicial vacuum, the historical actions and interpretations of the branches necessarily plays a significant role in establishing the meaning of executive privilege. So the precedent for charging an administrative official under something like this is basically the equivalent of charging Trump under the Logan Act. It's political warfare. Roger Stone. Graves continued the legacy of targeting Stone, orchestrating a politically motivated raid and prosecution that served as the blueprint for attacking Trump allies.
The Roger Stone clemency was a very important moment for justice in this country. You had a completely bogus Russia witch hunt that found nothing, and in order to justify the waste of taxpayer dollars, you had Robert Mueller charging people with process crimes. McCabe was charged of false statements, lying to federal investigators. Brennan, false statements to Congress. Clapper, false statements to Congress. But last time I checked, they didn't have 29 FBI agents wearing tactical gear showing up there at their house in a pre-dawn raid, wielding M4 rifles, sweeping across their lawn, as happened to Roger Stone. They didn't have 4 agents using battering rams, breaking down their front door over false statements. And they didn't have helicopters hovering over their houses and 2 police boats that roared up. Instead, McCabe and Clapper and Brennan and these guys are given lucrative contracts, books, contributorships. So there are really 2 standards of justice in this country.
These cases were not about justice. They were about using the legal system to dismantle Trump's political movement and silence opposition. Mathew and Fatima Graves operated as a power couple deeply embedded in the left's machinery. While Mathew weaponized the DOJ to target conservatives, Fatima advanced the ideological framework that justified his actions. Together, they turned the public service into a platform for radical activism. Under Fatima's leadership, the NWLC received significant funding from George Soros-backed entities, including the Tides Foundation and the New Venture Fund. These organizations are known for their efforts to undermine American institutions and promote radical leftist agendas. Fatima was a vocal advocate for packing the Supreme Court, aiming to dilute its conservative majority and turn the judiciary into a tool for progressive policies. Her activism reflects the broader Marxist agenda that has infiltrated federal institutions. So honestly, in terms of Mathew Graves packing it up, dude, good riddance. Don't let the door hit you on the way out. Hey, thank you guys so much joining me on this exploration into Mathew Graves and, his weaponization of the DOJ. I appreciate it, guys. And if you like the content, I got more stuff almost exactly like this. Deep dives, kind of casual. If you enjoy it, please check out all my other stuff. I got music too. Thank you.